Hello, and welcome to the third part of the Flowacademy series, where we will be learning on how to set up our member subscription on Stripe. Now, on the last episode, we explored how to set up the verification process for a user email. So, this tutorial here is a follow up to that. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, before we begin, I need to address a small issue regarding the magic link and the verification token that we addressed on the last episode. So before we continue with this, let me just quickly hop over onto Wized. Okay, so on Wized at the moment, I noticed that there's a small flaw that we have, and that is so if you remember correctly, we have our magic token, and when the user lands on the verify email page, and we are generally would be greeted with this error message here if our magic token has expired. But specifically for us, where we already have used up the magic token, this is not the right error message. And which kind of leaves this user with a security risk because now they have the option. So if someone else landed on this page using the user's old magic token, they would be able to request another magic token with their email. So that's a massive security risk. So what we're going to do is, for clarity, I'm going to hop over onto Xano here and take you to the database. Head over to users and scroll all the way down here. So click on the magic link, and you'll notice that, as you can see, that we've already used the magic link. So in the decoding magic token group, we have a lot of preconditions here. So the precondition that we have is this one right here, user magic link expiration, where we check if the expired, this one right here, user magic link used. So we want to make sure that we check if the user magic link has been used. But the thing is, this function is actually positioned right after the expiration check, which is why if I run the debugger here, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Wized and copy this magic token. So I'm going to copy that token, head over to Xano, paste that in, run it. Oh, what? Please enter a valid JSON. Oh, that is my bad. Okay, so as you can see, we're getting magic token has expired. Please request another one. This is the wrong error. We should not be getting this error at all. Instead, it should tell us that magic link has been used. And this is important because if you remember, we are basing our activation link form visibility based on the error message that we receive. So I'm going to position this before the expiration. Now, if I run this again, you'll notice that this magic link has already been used. Now, if I go ahead and publish this, so let's do that and jump over to onto Wized. So if I reload this page, this magic link has already been used. Now we're simply going to let the user click here, go back to login, which would take the user back to the login page. Okay, so jumping back to Webflow and onto the content that we're going to be focusing on for this tutorial, I'm currently on the select a plan page. So if I open this up right here, for this episode specifically, we're going to address the select a plan page, subscription successful page, and subscription canceled. So we're going to learn to set all those pages up. Now, focusing on the build, we have a loader here that you'll initially see when the user lands on this page. They will see this, and then once the content is all loaded up, we're going to hide that loader. And then we have our our radio selects here. We have the annual and monthly plan here. And then we got some basic text here to sell the user on what they're going to be receiving from this membership. Now, something to point out here is that we have custom JavaScript that is connected, well, basically plugged in to this radio select and the monthly radio select here as well. So we have the annual radio select selected by default, which in turn shows them this. So if I look at the layers panel here, we have two pricing total grid div blocks. But if I click on the second one, we have a combo class of hidden. So if I get rid of that hidden right here, so we have the monthly breakdown. So you can kind of guess that obviously when the user selects the monthly, we then turn this on and then switch this off. And then, of course, the other way around if the user were to select annual. So that's pretty much what is happening custom code wise. And we also, because this is a demo, we kind of want to let the user know that, hey, you can use this card number to test this out. For the actual checkout, when you click on the checkout here, of course, this would take the user to the Stripe checkout page. This is something that we will be configuring directly on Wized. So yeah, that's that for the select a plan page. So let's head over to subscription successful page. This is just simply going to show the user that, hey, you've purchased the plan successfully. So we are going to redirect them to the dashboard, which is exciting. And then we also have a subscription cancel page, but this subscription cancel page is not related to this chapter, this specific tutorial at all. This is for the event where the user has not paid for their subscription at a later date. So, it's the end of the month. We are going to collect the payment from the user, and they haven't paid. So, whenever they try logging into the dashboard, we're just simply going to redirect them to this page. Now, we're also going to come back to this page at a later point in our series, but we're also going to be setting this up for this episode as well. So that is that for the Webflow side of things. So now I'm going to head over onto our Stripe and just quickly walk through a few things. Now, the thing about Stripe is that I'm not going to cover the tutorial on how to set up certain things on Stripe. Instead, I'm going to link two videos of Xano. So Xano's done an amazing tutorial on how you need to set up your Stripe. Um, so I have copied exactly that for our demo here. So yeah, I highly recommend that you pause this video here, check those two videos out. The setup is going to make a whole lot more sense when you take a look at it. However, just going to walk through a few things. So you'll notice that on my Stripe account, I'm currently on test mode. We just need the test mode to try this demo out. Obviously, enabling the test mode is going to give you the API keys for your test mode. So make sure to copy that and paste it over onto your Xano environment variable. Again, this is something that is already covered in the other Xano tutorial. So that is that. But let me also walk through this developer thing here. Um, you can check your API keys here for Xano. And yeah, so we have our webhooks. So we need a way where Stripe can communicate with Xano and let Xano know that, hey, you have users that has purchased this plan. So then we grab the details for that purchase and then we store that in Xano. So that's exactly why we need webhooks here. We have two webhooks at the moment. We have subscription update and subscription created. So these are two and webhooks that we're going to be covering in this episode. So obviously at the current state, our user is about to check out, is about to select a plan and check out. So we're going to be using this webhook right here, but I'm going to show you the details. Now you'll notice that this webhook is triggered by this specific event. The event being when the customer is creating a subscription. That's when Stripe communicates with Xano, letting Xano know that, hey, here are the details for the user who just purchased this plan. So that's what this, as you can see, we're using the Xano's API endpoint. So that's how Stripe communicates with Xano. Then we have our subscription update here. This is for the event if the user, actually, it would be helpful if I just open this up here. So this webhook is triggered by these two events right here. So we have the customer subscription deleted and customer subscription updated. So the updated is basically the event where the user updates pays their plan at the end of the month or at the end of the year. And that renewed payment comes through our system, letting us know that, hey, they have paid, so they're still a member. And in the event that the user decided to delete their account, so, this webhook gets triggered and then, yeah, it stays in our system. So yeah, that's that for the Stripe side of things. I think I've also covered the product catalog here that we have. You obviously have to create your products that you have for your demo store. And another thing I also wanted to point out is that in the customers list, and if you remember correctly, on the last episode, we used this email right here. And this user is a new user. And this user is about to cover the flow where they select a plan and they're going to check out in order to get access to the dashboard. So if I click into this customer, you'll notice that there is nothing on this customer. They don't have any paid plans or anything, which is something that we're going to be covering right now anyway. So that's a great segue for us to now jump into Xano. All right. Now, for this episode, we are going to be focusing on 4 endpoints in total. We already have a group here called membership. And over here, we have the create checkout, subscription created, subscription update, and the fourth one being auth me. So this is basically responsible for getting the record belonging to the authentication token. So based on the user's authentication token, we are going to grab the user details and then kind of decide whether or not this user should actually be choosing a package. If they are, we then redirect them to the dashboard. If not, we actually keep them in the choose a plan page. But anyway, we're going to get into the details for that later on. So let's start off with the create checkout endpoint. All right, so for the inputs, we have successUrl, cancelUrl, line items, and customer ID. Now, like I mentioned before, you need to check out the Xano tutorials on the Stripe setup because, again, the API endpoints has been copied exactly based on how Michael from those tutorials have pointed these out. So we have successUrl for the event where when we're making a request to Stripe, we want to let Stripe know that, hey, when this is successful, we want to redirect the user to this successUrl. So obviously, this is something that we're going to be setting up in Wized. And then we have the cancel URL. So we also tell Stripe, like, hey, in case if they want to cancel during the checkout, then we want to redirect the user back to this URL. Now, again, this is also something that we set up on Wized. And then we have line items. This is us telling Stripe, like, hey, these are the items that the user would like to purchase and would like to check out with. So this is a JSON field, which is something we're also going to be setting up on Wized. And then we have the customer ID. This is basically the user's Stripe ID that we have. Now, if you remember correctly, when the user is verifying their email, we actually make a call to Stripe and then we grab a Stripe ID, customer ID. So we store that information inside the database for that user. So each and every user that is signing up for an account, we assign a Stripe customer ID to their name. So yeah, we grab that customer ID as well. So that's how Stripe knows, like, okay, this is the customer that is purchasing this plan. All right. So that's that for the inputs. And in the function stack, we have an API request. Again, I'm not going to walk through the set. I'm just going to quickly walk through the setup. But again, you need to watch those tutorials from the description. So we have a URL here for the checkout sessions, and then we are using a post method. And then let's check out the parameters here. So we have the success URL coming from our input. We have the cancel URL coming from our input as well. Then we need to explicitly mention the payment method types that we're going to be using. Of course, there are tons of other options that you can use, but for this demo, we're just going to be sticking to card. And then we have our customer ID. Then we have the line items. And then we also set the mode, which is a subscription based checkout. And then we have a billing address collection required. So this is a additional request that we're making in the API, letting Stripe know that, hey, we want to make sure that we're grabbing the billing address from the user. Now, in our use case, we actually don't really need it, but this was just something I was testing it out internally myself. So yeah, I've also marked this as required. Now, if you don't want to, you can just completely remove this part of it from the object if you want to. Okay, then we have for the headers, the basic authorization stuff, which is something that is covered in the Xano's tutorial. So yeah, that is that for this. So I'm just gonna go ahead, click on close here. And then we have a precondition to check that. Okay, so I actually forgot what this precondition is for. Stripe checkout response result error. Okay. So this is just simply checking out that just to make sure that we are not hitting an error, basically. So that's what this precondition is for. And yeah, and then we return a Stripe checkout. So basically, this whenever we're making this API request, we have the entire payload as our response. So that's what this API endpoint does. Now, um, basically, this endpoint actually returns a URL. So we grab that URL and then we basically redirect the user to that checkout URL. So that is that, and that's what create checkout does. All right, so let's move on to subscription created, and let's see what we have here. All right, so now over on to membership subscription created endpoint. Stripe essentially communicates with Xano right after when the user has created their subscription. It basically sends that webhook data over to Xano, and then we selectively choose few of the fields from there and then store that information from that webhook data onto our database. So yeah, let's see what exactly we're doing here. So on the input, you'll notice that we have a JSON input here, which is basically where our webhook data is coming from. And over onto function stack, we have this create variable. So let me just click on this. So the first function that we have is creating a variable, and we're calling it webhook data. That's where we store our webhook data onto this variable called webhook data. So that's our first function there. For the second function, we are calling it customer ID, and this is so basically, the webhook data that's coming from Stripe, it returns this object. And from that object, we have this key called customer. And that key contains the customer ID. So that's where we're storing the customer ID inside this variable. Why? Because right at the end of the function stack, we have this last function called edit record in users. So throughout this entire function stack, we are selectively choosing what pieces of information we need from that object. And then when we are editing the record, we're actually targeting the customer ID, the Stripe customer ID from the database, which is basically the customer ID that is coming from this variable right here. So whenever there's a match, we then unload all that data that we selected over onto that specific record in that database. Okay, so that's what this variable is here for. Now, the third variable is basically calling it current period start. Now, if you remember correctly, and it would be better if I actually just head over to database here, head over to users, and scroll all the way down here. And you'll notice that if I scroll here, we have our Stripe customer ID, we have membership status, we have membership plan, and then we have the current period start and current period end. So I actually went ahead and I was internally testing out a few things. So which is why these fields are filled in. But again, we will be running another test on this um, on our recording here for your understanding. So yeah, we have the current period start and current period end, which helps us understand how long the subscription is going to basically last. All right, so let's head over to our API endpoint here and resume our function stack walkthrough. Okay, so that's what this third function is doing. Now, in case if you're wondering, why do we have a function of multiplies added to this? That's because in Xano, everything is stored in milliseconds. So the timestamp that is inside the Stripe webhook object, it's basically in seconds. So we just need to multiply that to 1,000 to convert that into milliseconds. So hence why we have the multiply filter applied to it. All right, and then we have another update variable to our current period start. So the entire thing is in milliseconds. So what we need to do is to format that timestamp into a human readable format. So with date, month, and year. So we're just formatting it to that timestamp. It's going to make sense in just a bit as to why we're doing it that way. All right, so let's move on to the next function. We're repeating the same exact thing for the current period end. So you notice that we are creating another variable called current period end, where we have, again, grabbing that same data from the webhook data object. And then later on, we're also formatting the timestamp. So yeah, that is that. And then for the seventh function here, we have API request. So we have a separate API request being called to Stripe. And this time it's based off of the subscription ID. So as you can see, the subscription, we are using a replace filter. So instead of subscription ID, we're replacing it with webhook data object ID. Now, here's the thing. Now, when Stripe returns that webhook data, it doesn't exactly tell us what is the status for this subscription. So, therefore, to get a confirmed confirmed result on the status alone, we need to make this API request call. So that's essentially what we're doing here. Then we have our authorization here. So in so basically, just to point out and clarify, this is what I mean. So if I scroll here and we have membership status active, just to get this membership status, we need to make that API call. So that's what that API call is all about. All right, so that's the API request. And then we have a precondition. So the reason why we have a precondition here is to simply let us know on the front end that, hey, if something happened, then, give us this error message. That is simply just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, we know where the issue is coming from. So that's what this precondition is for. So obviously we have the condition to make sure that um, that our API request is set to successful is basically equals 200. So 200 equals to success basically. So yeah, that's what this function is for. Okay, then we have our ninth function here, which is the create variable subscription status. Again, this so we have a variable called subscription status, and like I said, this is coming from our API request. We have this whole data notation here, making sure that we grab the status from that API request. All right, let's see for our 10th function. We have membership ID. So, okay, we're grabbing the membership ID as well. So we have two membership IDs. One is the yearly plan and one is the monthly plan. So which is also stored in the webhook data. So we grab that from that object. Perfect. So then we have our 11th function here, which is the get record from membership type. Okay, so we're grabbing, so based on the API ID, we're matching that up with the membership ID. Okay, so if you remember correctly, we have a database called membership type, and we're returning that as a membership type variable. That's the name of the variable as well. So we're just matching it up, make sure that the membership ID that is coming from the webhook is matching up the API ID in our database table. This is something that has been addressed in episode 1 on how you get API ID for your products. So yeah, in case if you've forgotten that, please make sure to check that out. All right, and then for the last function, which is editing the record, firstly, we look for our specific user record based on the Stripe customer ID. And that Stripe customer ID is going to match the customer ID from this variable right here. So once we find that match, we want to make sure that we update their membership status, which is in this case going to be active, and then the type of membership that they're subscribed to. Is it a yearly or a monthly plan? And then we also note down the current period start and the current period end. We have a parse timestamp because if you don't apply this filter, Xano's database is not going to recognize the date the date format. So therefore, you have to parse this timestamp. And that is that for this endpoint. And then finally, for the response, we basically return the updated user record. So yeah, basically it just kind of shows us on the front end that, hey, the user is now part of this plan. And these are the other details that you need to be aware of. So yeah, that is that for this endpoint here. Perfect. So let's head over to our next endpoint, and that is the subscription update. All right. So just like our subscription created endpoint, the subscription update also has the same input as well. Again, like I said, when you're when your user has updated their subscription, it returns a webhook data, and that webhook data is in this input right here. Okay, so let's move into our function stack and click on the first function, and that is the webhook data. We're calling this a webhook data, and we store that entire webhook data into this variable. Perfect. Then you'll notice that in function 2 and function 3, we actually have two conditionals. Now let's look into the first conditional. So you'll notice that the first conditional is webhook data type customer subscription deleted. So Stripe, when it returns the webhook data, it actually specifies what type of data is this. Is this a customer subscription deleted or customer subscription updated? So in this case, we're dealing with customer subscription deleted. Now, just to point this out, deleted doesn't necessarily mean that the customer deleted their subscription. It just typically means that the customer canceled their subscription, which Stripe addresses it as deleted. So I just wanted to point this out. All right, now within this conditional, our next function for this is creating a variable. So we want to create the variable where we are calling this variable canceled at. And then basically, and again, if you remember correctly, Stripe stores their duration or timestamp in seconds. So we are adding the filter of multiply, and then we're converting that seconds into milliseconds. And this is the dot notation path for that object. For that object to grab that duration or timestamp. And once we multiply that, we then edit the record in users. Again, based on the Stripe customer ID, we get the customer ID from the webhook data. So once we find a match there, we simply update the membership status. So in this case, because the user has canceled their membership, obviously this is going to say canceled for the membership status. So that's it. That is what we do when the user has canceled their subscription. So this is that conditional right here. Here is the other conditional. And in this case, this is where webhook data type is customer subscription updated. So basically, this is what you would come to when your user has paid for their subscription next month or next year. So yeah, in that event, we have this function here. So we're calling it current period start because they are renewing their subscription. Obviously, now we need to grab the current period start and current period end. That's what these two functions are doing. And just like our previous API endpoint, we're applying the same multiplication filters here. And once that is done, we make sure, okay, so we have this function get record from membership type. Okay, so we try to get the membership ID again. And then again, this is exactly like our last API endpoint setup where we try to look up for the Stripe customer ID. Once we get a match on that record, we then update the membership status, the membership type, the new current period start, and the new current period end. So essentially, we're just updating their Stripe subscription details. Really, that's what this endpoint is responsible for. And at the end, we're returning the updated version of what that user's record looks like in the response. So yeah, that is that for the membership subscription update. Now let's head over to AuthMe and understand how the setup for this is done. All right, now in AuthMe, so a little bit about this API endpoint. When we have the user logging into our system, we are constantly going to be having this API endpoint. We're going to keep executing this API endpoint no matter whichever page they head over to. And this API endpoint is solely responsible for making sure if the user does have access to a certain page. We actually try to determine that based off the information that this API endpoint returns. So let's check it out what it has in its function stack. So you'll notice that on the first function we're trying to grab the user record based on the authentication token that we get from Wized. So we grab the authentication from Wized, and then we run that through our API endpoint here. Once we find a match, then we go move on to our second function, which is a conditional function. So let's check it out. Now, this might seem a little confusing, but you'll notice that we have users current period end, which is set to null which is not null, and user's magic link used, which is not false. Now, why are we using these two fields? It's very important to keep in mind that the user's current period end, which is basically tells you if this field um, is well, this field basically signifies when their subscription is going to end. Now, if this field is empty in the database, that means they've never purchased a subscription to begin with. So that's what we have this function here for, is not null. Because if it is null, that means their subscription hasn't been purchased. That's why we have this right here. Then we have users magic link used. Now, if you remember correctly, we have an object there called magic link. And inside that magic link, we have a Boolean field where we want to check if the magic link has been used. And this is the other field where we check if the user actually verified their email. So if they haven't verified their email, then we take a separate course of action. So when you combine these two variables, this is how we decide whether or not and where to basically redirect the user based on whatever outcome we have. And we have a separate set of logic that needs to be applied on the front end. So that's why we are using these two variables here. Now, at the moment, this sounds a little confusing, but I promise you this is all going to make sense in just a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right. So let's assume that the user's current period end is not null and their magic link used is not set to false. So that means they're going to have this variable here. So this function, which we are creating a variable and we're calling it membership end date. And in this variable, we have the user's current period end. So we're grabbing the date from that field and then we parse that timestamp. You might be wondering, why are we parsing that timestamp? It's because of this next action right here, which is also another conditional action. So basically, we want to make sure that this conditional action is so we have this now, which is not basically, we want to make sure that the current date does not exceed the membership end date. So what that means is that let's say that today, we want to make sure that the current date doesn't exist the membership end date. And if it does, that means your membership has expired. So um, if the condition is true, then we want to make sure that the we have a separate variable and we're calling it users provide access. So then provide access should provide the value of false. Now, this is what we're going to use over on Wiz to determine whether or not we are going to allow this user to get access to the dashboard. This is the key deciding factor here. And, if it's true, like if the current date is less than the membership end date, then we provide access and set this to true. So that's what allows the user to be able to get into the dashboard. And then lastly, for this condition, we have a variable where we have to concatenate the user's full name. So we have the user's first name and the user's last name. So that's what we're concatenating this for. All right. Perfect. Now, this is the conditional statement for if everything is fine. And let's say else if the membership end date, right here for this conditional. So if user's current period end is null or and if magic link is used is set to actually false, then what we do is overall we just create a variable and we just provide the access of false. That's it. We just simply don't let the user get access to the dashboard. Of course, there are other logic applied to this as well, but we apply that in the front end, which is something that we're going to be covering anyway in just a bit. And then we're also concatenating the user's first name and last name on this conditional as well. Again, this is also a reason that will make a whole lot more sense why we're concatenating this, and in just a bit. And as for the response, we just simply return the updated record of that specific user. So yeah, that's how we can basically understand whether or not what action to take for this specific user. Hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, that brings us to the end of the Xano walkthrough. We can finally kick things off with Wiz now. The first thing on the list we have is to create several variables that we're going to need first. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. Now, if you remember correctly, on the Xano endpoint walkthrough, we need successUrl. So I already have the URL off note. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to set the initial value of this because this is just a static value, which is not going to change. Actually, didn't need that. Okay, so this is going to be our success URL. So in case if you remember correctly, if I close this, when the user is successfully purchased their membership and we want to send them off to the subscription successful page, which is this page right here. So that's what the success URL is going to be. Of course, this is not going to change. So this is just, we're going to leave it as is. All right, perfect. Now we also need to set a cancel URL. Again, just as a reminder, the cancel URL is basically when the user is on the checkout screen and they decide to cancel that. So we want to return them back to the select a plan page. So as you can see, I've put a select a plan page here. And for a reminder, this is the page right here. So this is the page right here that we want to redirect the user back to. At the moment, the content for this page is not loading up. That's because we have our Wized cloak attribute applied to this, which is currently hiding everything, as its default option. All right, perfect. Now we're going to create another variable, and we're going to call this planPrice. So we're going to need this when we set up the checkout in this page. This is all going to make sense in just a bit, but for now, let's just put this plan price for now. All right, and then we're going to create another one called annual price. And this annual price is going to hold the API ID of your Stripe product. So if I paste this in, you'll notice that it has the price API ID. Now, just to jog your memory on this, this you can get from the Stripe page. So if I head over to Stripe here and head over to catalog, so there we go. You'll notice that each of your product has a API ID. So because we have two packages, we have annual package and a monthly package. So the yearly plan, I just need to copy this API ID. So that's what I've done here. All right, perfect. Now let's also create a another variable, and we're going to call this monthly price. I'll already have the value off screen as well. Amazing. Now we need another variable, and that is going to be the dashboard URL. Now we need this variable here because when everything is successful, we want to redirect the user to our dashboard page. So that's what this link is for. So we're taking them to the dashboard learning page, which is basically the central page for our dashboard here. So under the dashboard, we have 3 pages in total. We got learning, course, and account settings. So we want to send them to the learning page, which is basically the home page for dashboard. Now, lastly, we need to create an iterator. So we're going to call this index, and we're going to put return 0 as the initial value. So there we go. We got our iterator set up as well. Perfect. Now, next on the list, now before we continue, at the time that I made this tutorial, it's been a day after I've made the last episode. So by now, you'll notice that our auth token is now null. And if I click into this auth token, you'll notice that its lifetime. Oh, there is no lifetime here. Previously, it had 1 day as a default. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change that to 7. It's going to be easier that way. So yeah, long story short, we don't have an auth token. We also don't have our login set as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my account that I had that I was testing, that I was using to test this out. So I'm going to delete that and I'm going to create an account and go through that entire process again. So you can skip this chapter if you want to, but I'm not going to edit this out. So, all right, what I'm going to do is head over to database, go to users, database, and so this is the account that I have. So I'm going to select that and delete that. All right, perfect. Once that is deleted, I'm going to head over to Wized here and just simply go to my auth page, create an account. Now, instead of waiting for my email, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the magic token, gmail.com. I'm going to grab the magic token from Xano instead of my email. It's just easier that way. There's just too many steps involved with the grabbing the magic link from my token. All right. So that is done. So what I'm going to do is drag that window here just to show you that our resend API is working. As soon as I click here, obviously this is going to take me to my verification page, but I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm just going to do handle everything through Wized. All right, so click on request history. Let's check the input if this is the right one. Yep, that's the right one. And click on output. Just copy the token. All right, perfect. Now that I've copied the token, all I need to do is add that parameter into our Wized canvas here. Perfect. Now that it has been added, all I need to do is head over to verify email. Amazing. Your email is verified, redirecting you now. Okay, perfect. So we have received our auth token, but as you can see, we haven't been properly redirected to our membership page, but it is working. We are going to do another test again once we've set up the plan. Once we set up the select a plan page. So yeah, it's going to work. Okay, so first on the list, we need to create our first request, and that is going to be called get user details. So let's create that. So we're going to execute this request as soon as the user lands on this page, because if you remember correctly, first we need to get the details for this user to decide what our next steps should be. So let's do that. Return. Let's head over to Xano to copy the endpoint properly. Oh, okay. So we don't have any URL parameters. So we just need to put in content type here and authorization. That is because our endpoint here is, as you can see, it requires authentication. So that's where we are going to utilize our auth token to make sure that we are executing this API request successfully, which is why we went through the whole dance routine of creating an account and just to get our auth token. All right, so this is going to be return. So as we start progressing on the setup for the Wiz setup and everything, I'm not going to repeat what you're seeing here. All right, now for the authorization here, the setup is going to be a little different. So we're going to use backticks, and we're going to put in bearer, and then we're going to put in dollar and curly braces here. And inside this curly braces, we are going to put in our auth token. And the reason why we use, because we need to grab the value of a variable and then put that inside a string, we need to use backticks. So if I show you this here now, you'll notice that we have bearer and then we have the entire auth token right here, which is pretty cool. So awesome stuff. All right, so next on the list we have is the create checkout. But before I proceed, I forgot to completely set the method for our get user detail request here. So let's set that to get and close that and then create a new one. Well, actually, rather than creating a new one, let's just duplicate this. Call this create checkout. And our create checkout is basically connected to this endpoint here. So let's go back. So it's this one right here, create checkout. So let's copy that. So this is a post request. Gotta remember that. Perfect. Okay, so now for the URL parameters, let's check out what we have here on Xano. We have success URL, cancel, line items, customer ID. All right, so let's do that. Success URL. Then we have cancel URL. And then we have line items, have customer ID. For the success URL, if you remember, we've already went ahead and set up our variable for this. So we just need to push this variable in there. That's it. For the cancel URL, it's the same story as well. For the line items, however, we need to create our own JSON here. All right, so let's do that. So return, and then we have curly braces as well. All right, so let's create a key, and we're going to call it price. And for the price, we are going to set v.planPrice variable for the price. How is that value of v.planPrice going to be set into this? We're going to learn about it in just a bit. Let's create our other key called quantity. Now, quantity here is because the user is purchasing a subscription, so the quantity is going to be set to 1. This is going to be a static value, so we're just going to leave this as is. All right, for the customer ID, now this is something that we're going to need from our get user details. So what I'm going to do is execute that. And there we go. It has executed that. So what exactly are we targeting here for the customer ID? There we go. Stripe customer ID. So let's go ahead and push that in. Perfect. So now we have our customer ID. Okay, so now that we have set this up, let's go ahead and start creating our very first action. And that action is going to be validate user. So we're going to validate this user. And how are we going to do that? So this is going to be an event-based action, and with the trigger being a custom condition. And that custom condition is going to be that when the user is on this page, so we want to make sure that we execute this action right here. So I just need to make sure to copy this properly. Select a plan. There we go. Because we don't want this action to be executing on each and every page. All right. Now for the action itself, we want to navigate the user. So we want to navigate the user to the login page. So why do we want to do this? So if the user doesn't have any auth token, and if the get user details, so if you remember correctly, we obviously created this get user details. So if this request here is not successfully executed, plus if the auth token, where's the auth token actually? So oh, there it is. So if the auth token is null, plus the get user details has not been executed properly, then we don't want that user or that guest user to be on this page. This select a plan page is specifically for users that has verified their email and doesn't have a paid plan, or their plan has been canceled. So only those scenarios would allow the user to be on this page. So we want to make sure that we run this action properly. So that's the purpose of this validate user. Now, before I put in the URL here, obviously it's best that we set the condition, or else it's going to start looping, and Wized is going to crash. So okay, so let's start putting in our logic here. So our logic is auth token is null. So remember, auth token is null, and so the other logic that we want to apply is status is not 200. So let me recap this again. Auth token is empty, and our get user detail status is not 200. So if that is the case, and if so, we're immediately going to redirect you to the login page. That's it. It's plain and simple. So for this, we're going to put the return end path, redirect the user over to auth/login. There we go. Perfect. So obviously at the moment we are on select the plan page. We're not going to be redirected. That is because we don't meet the condition. For the second action, we are now going to duplicate this. We are going to execute our get user details request. Let's do that. That's going to be an event based as well. We are going to do this when the page starts loading. This is also going to be conditional as well. Return and path is the same story here as well. Membership. Okay. So we want to make sure that this action doesn't execute everywhere. And the action is perform a request. Actually, take that away and get user details. Okay, so now next on the list we have is the visibility for this loader here. So if I turn on the X-ray on, you'll notice that it's called content loader. So let's do that. Let's duplicate this. So let's call it set visibility for content loader. So this is going to be an element, and our element is called content loader. We're going to be setting the visibility on this, and the visibility is this thing is only going to be visible when our get user details request is requesting is set to true. So there we go. Now it's gone because obviously it has executed, so it's no longer visible. Now, next on the list, we need to make sure that the actual content for this page comes into view. So let's do that. All right, so I'm going to call this set visibility for membership content. Okay, so this is also going to be element. Now, I just need to head over to Webflow. I have a central div block. So yeah, there's this whole container here. And I believe this is the one that we're targeting. Oh, okay. Nope, this is not the one. Plan wrapper. Okay, this is the one. So this is called Wized membership content. It also has the attribute of Wized cloak applied to it, which is why it is hidden by default. All right, so let's call it membership content. So set visibility. That is true. Now I already have the logic on my notes, so I'm just going to copy that on my note and paste that entire thing, and let's walk through it and understand what is happening here. Okay, so we have our get user detail status set to 200. So this is quite self-explanatory. We have our get user details, so we want to make sure that the status is returning 200. This is true. The second logic is our get user details data user magic link used is set to true. So this logic here ensures that we are checking if the user's magic link has been used, which means that they have been verified. So if you look into the request here, the payload that Xano returned, you'll notice that we have a Boolean value here, magic link used. It does tell us that the magic link that this user indeed has used this. So that's great. That's true as well. Then we have another logic here that says get user details data users provide access. That is set to false. So again, now we need to make sure that this is set to false. So if you look at the payload here, we also have provide access, which is also set to false, which means that Xano is telling us that this user should not be provided access to the dashboard, which explains why they're in the select a plan page. And therefore, we are able to see our content here. Okay, so now next on the list we have is basically when we land on this page, we want to ensure that the annual radio select is actually selected by default. So let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. All right. And we're going to call this custom radio function because we have a custom code involved here. Custom radio function. So this is going to be an event-based action, and this is going to be executed when the request of get user details is finished. Only then we run that function. And in order to get that function, we need to refer to our Notion doc here. And over here, you'll notice that we have the entire code. So just to quickly walk through this code, it just basically tells Wized that, hey, the first we need to grab the element that has the ID of annual. And yeah, we just basically select that radio select. And then we have all these selectors, as you can see in green. These are all the selectors. So it makes sure that it also tells that, hey, if we want to select the monthly radio select, then we can switch in between. And when we are switching, we want to make sure that our div blocks are being shown properly. So just to recap, when I select this um, radio select, obviously this is selected by default, which is why we're seeing this div block right here. If I select this div block, this div block right here is going to hide away, and it's going to reveal the div block that is related to the monthly pricing. And that's what this code does. All right, let's see if I'm missing anything. Obviously, we have the hidden classes here, and then we have another function here that also makes sure that we have the class of W redirected check applied to our radio select so that it visually looks like it has been selected. But yeah, that's that. Okay. Obviously, if I have missed anything out, we do have the Chat GPT prompt here that kind of explains the whole scenario. All right, so let's go ahead and paste that in. And there you go. Now it's selected. If I select this, you'll notice that this is going to switch over to monthly. There we go. Works beautifully. So what I'm going to do is reload the page, and you'll notice that the annual gets selected by default. Perfect. On to our next action. Let's copy that. All right. So our next action is going to be creating the checkout if when the annual package is selected. So let's do that. I'm going to call it create checkout only when the annual is selected. So we want to, this is an event-based action as well. And we want to run a function. And we also have a condition applied to this. So let's apply a condition. Now, before I apply the code, let me just quickly put in the condition here. And it's quite simple. We want to make sure that this code runs on this page only. Membership, select a plan. All right, let's head over to our Notion doc now. Create checkout annual. All right, let's see what's happening here. Get the element and add a click event listener. So we're attaching an event listener to our checkout button. So just to make this clear, we actually have a checkout here. So as you can see, this checkout button here is called Wized Annual Price. We also have another checkout, so which is for the monthly price. There we go. So we have this checkout, which is the monthly price, and this checkout, which is the annual price. So let me go ahead and revert that. So just for clarity, wanted to show that. So we're attaching an event listener to our annual price. So whenever that is clicked, so set plan price from annual price variable. So basically, remember how we set a separate variable where we set the annual price API ID. So we grab the value from that Wized variable, and then we set that value as the plan price variable. So just to clarify, again, this is going to make sense as we start visualizing. So rather than me showing that, let me just copy this code. I think it will be a lot easier that way. Let me just paste that in. Okay. So let's reload that. Okay. So at the moment, so if I click on checkout here, as you can see, plan price is set to, oh, it looks like the annual price and the monthly price is set to null. Okay. Okay. So I finally managed to figure this out. So if I click into this now, yeah, I don't know why, but apparently there was something with my quotes. It wasn't typed in properly. So yeah, that is now solved. So which brings us back to our point now. You'll notice that the annual price and monthly price, of course, these are static values. They're always going to be there. And you'll notice that the plan price here is currently set to null. So what we're going to do, uh, okay, so this has been set. So if this is working properly, as soon as I click on checkout, you'll notice that the value for annual price is going to be set into the plan price. So let's do that. There we go. Alrighty. So it seems like we've been redirected, which is not supposed to happen, or maybe it is. Let's check into the code. Okay. All right. So again, something that I've completely missed out is that we also do have the functionality where it executes the create checkout request. So as soon as you click on that button, it also executes our create checkout request and it redirects the user to the create checkout. So I'm not sure if the create checkout has actually executed here. It has. So as you can see, we have the create checkout and you'll notice that we should have a URL here, if I'm correct. There we go. So that's the URL. So this is the URL that has been generated for our user. So this is the URL that our code is grabbing, and then it redirects the user to this URL right here. So that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is, because Wized is not rendering this, I'm just going to click out of this page. Just head over to subscription successful. It's just any page. So we're just trying to bounce back into this. So as you can see that this is working, so which is perfect. Okay, so next on the list we have is this loader. So let's handle the visibility for that loader. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call it set visibility. All right, so let's call it set visibility for annual checkout loader. Spelled checkout wrong. All right, so this is going to be an element-based action, and let's turn the X-ray on here real quick. Okay, so that's annual checkout loader. There we go. And we're going to set the visibility, and the visibility is exactly when the create checkout is requesting and when it's set to true. Perfect. All right, so what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to create the same exact action for monthly. So I'm just going to skip forward to that bit. Okay, so I went ahead and I've created the actions. So we have the create checkout monthly and set the visibility for monthly checkout loader. Now, so if I show you this, preview this here real quick, switching this over, and obviously clicking on checkout, this is also going to work, but we're going to test that out later. Um, Now for the next action that we have is we want to redirect the user to the dashboard if the user happens to be an active member. So what do I mean by that? Let's try to type this out. And if active member. So I'm going to explain what is basically happening here. And this is going to be the last action for this specific page. So we want to execute this when request finishes, and that request is going to be get user details. So this is also going to be conditional, and that condition being, so I already have this on my notes, so I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. So we want to make sure that this action is basically triggered when we're on the page membership select a plan, membership subscription successful, and membership subscription canceled. So if you look at here, we have membership select a plan, subscription canceled, and subscription successful. That's when we want to basically make this redirection happen. So what constitutes for this redirection? So let's try to set that up. This is going to be a navigate to action. We're going to set the URL later on, but let's set up the conditional first. I have this on my notes, so let me copy that and I can explain it better. Okay, so let's go through this. So our first logic being get user details, data, user magic link use set to true. So we want to make sure that if, again, the magic link which is used is set to true. So we need to make sure that over here, our get user detail magic is set to true, which is true. So that is true. Now let's look at the second logic. Get user details, data user provide access is also set to true. In our payload here, it says false. That is because obviously we haven't subscribed to anything yet. And then we have C auth token is not null. In our case, our auth token is basically not null. So, which is true. So it's only this part that is not true, which is why that's what's going to stop us from being redirected into the dashboard page. So I already have that on my notes here. So I'm going to copy that and paste that in here. So we're going to redirect the user to the dashboard learning page. Perfect. So that brings us to the end of setting up all the actions for this page alone. So what I've decided to do now is because I realized that the episode is going on for a little too long, so I've decided to cut it short and went ahead and I've wrapped up on all the actions for our membership folder. So I've created a central membership folder here. And inside this membership folder, we have three subfolders. We got to select a plan. So if I open up select a plan, obviously we just covered all the actions here. So this is fine. So let me move on to the next folder, which is basically subscription successful. So this is for the subscription successful page here. And we only have one action here. So we're calling this redirect user. Now, again, as soon as the user purchases the subscription, we redirect them to the success page. And over there, we basically, what happens here is that basically, let's walk through this. We have a trigger of page finishes loading. And we only want to make sure that this action is triggered when the user on the subscription successful page. And we run a function where we redirect that user to the dashboard learning page. Now, if you remember correctly, we have a variable called dashboardUrl. So that's what we're using here on this code. So we're just telling Wiz that redirect this user to the to the Wized variable called dashboardUrl. So we grab the URL from there, and in 2 seconds, we redirect the user to the dashboard learning page. Now, if I show you the subscription, then we have another folder called subscription canceled. So these are all the actions that we have for the subscription canceled page. So for the first action we have is the set header text. Now at the moment, I cannot access the canceled page. That's because the logic applied for it won't permit me to get into that page. However, we're going to test this again in the future date. So this is going to make a lot more sense, but for now, let's just walk through it anyway. I also have my Webflow page here. So I'm going to head over to the canceled page so that it's easier. So we have this attribute here that's called canceled header. So if I revert back to Wiz here, so we've selected that element called canceled header. And then we set the text for it as well. So what is that text? Basically, we are saying welcome back, and then we set the name for it. If you remember correctly, we have get user detail. So we're executing that request, and we grab the first name from that payload, and then we put in, so here's the thing, dot, dot, dot. So basically, we're setting the header text straight from here. So that's what this action is for. The second action is redirect user to login. Now, this is the action where we want to make sure that we redirect the user only if, so we have all these logic here applied. So we have C auth token is null, and the get user detail status is not 200. So based on this, we want to make sure that, if the user doesn't meet this criteria, we're going to just redirect them to the login page. That's what this action does. And then thirdly, set visibility to canceled content. So we only reveal the content for the canceled page for under these conditions. So we want to make sure that the auth token is not empty. The second logic is that the provide access is set to false and the user's magic link used is set to true. So in our case, all this is actually true. So we should be able to get to the cancel page, but we're not able to do that yet. Yeah, as you can see, we're not able to do it. So I think I managed to resolve the issue. And the reason why this wasn't working is because I forgot to make sure that the get user detail, which the request that we've made out previously, this wasn't executing. So we forgot to add this action to our canceled page. So now, basically, what I have is I've created this action. So I just need to make sure that I have this right. Subscription canceled, membership subscription canceled. All right, so let's put that in subscription. All right, there we go. Membership subscription cancel. So whenever we're on that page, we're going to make sure that get user details is executed. And when it's executed, everything, all the other actions are going to work. So let's do that. Perfect. So as you can see now it's working. All right, so I think I've already covered all these steps. And we also have this fourth action here, which sets the visibility to canceled content, which is already something that we have ran through. So if I click here, this should set me back to, to the select a plan page. Now that we've built everything out, obviously now it's time to test this out. Uh, but we're not going to be able to test this out inside of Wiz. So obviously we're going to have to preview the site, but previewing it is not going to work. So if I click on preview, so obviously we have not set up our login and we need to set up the login to be able to create our auth token so that we can make everything work. So obviously we're not going to be able to test this out as we're going to be focusing on setting up the login on the next episode. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually close this and I'm going to go to the actual demo site and which is this over here. So this is the actual demo site. And I'm going to put in my login details here. All right. And demo 1234. Now, if everything is correct, which it is, and because this follows the same setup as how we've set everything up right now, and it has the same database as well. So this should take me to the checkout, pick a plan page. So let's do that. Let's sign in. Nope. Alrighty. So this is working. So let's go with the annual plan and let's hit checkout. So this should take me to the Stripe checkout page. And we're finally on the Stripe checkout page. And you'll notice that the email here is not letting me edit this because Stripe is aware that this is a user that has already subscribed, that user details that has already been added into the Stripe database. So yeah, it's not going to let me edit this. So this is now, let's say I decide to cancel this. If I click on cancel, this is going to bring me back to select a plan. If I select the monthly package here and click on checkout, hopefully we should be able to see our monthly package. And there we go. We see our monthly package here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put in my dummy card number here. And let's put in 1225, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's put in my address here. So now if I click on subscribe, this should take me to the success page. So let's click on subscribe, but keep in mind that once we hit the subscribe page, it's going to take me to the header, to the dashboard page, but this is on the live demo. So let's see what happens. All right, so we're on the success page. And there we go. We're on the dashboard page now. But because we're testing this out on the actual demo, we're going to be testing this out again once we've set the login page and the dashboard page. We're going to be consistently testing everything out. So yeah, that is that. Now, another thing, obviously, that I've forgotten to test out is the canceled page. But then again, the canceled page will have to come at a later stage to really understand how the canceled page works. So, yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode. And yeah, hopefully that wasn't too hard. I know it was a bit lengthy, but it's going to be worth it once you start building this out for yourself. And if you have any queries, please leave them in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.